Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Reinventing OSS for an NFV SDN Era, sponsored by UBIqube. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be captured, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up by email. At the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulty, please click on the yellow help widget with the question mark. Here you can find answers to common questions. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green resource list widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask for your feedback. This survey will pop open on your screen and will only take a minute of your time. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately one day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I'd now like to turn the event over to Heavy Reading's Principal Analyst, Ari Banerjee. Ari?
Thanks, Allison. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are today. Welcome to today's webinar, Reinventing OSS for an NFV SDN Era. This webinar is brought to you by Light Reading and sponsored by UBIqube Solutions. My name is Ari Banerjee. I'm a Principal Analyst with Heavy Reading, and I'll be acting as a moderator today. Joining me in this webinar today is Hervé Guizon, VP of Engineering and CTO, UBIqube. Hervé has about 20 years of experience in the IP service provider industry. He started his career at France Telecom R&D Labs, where he covered IP routing and high-speed core network projects. His expertise spans IP network and security, wireline and wireless, physical and virtual resource management, and associated service management tools, which includes orchestration, assurance, security, performance management, analytics, etc. As an early founding member, he has been leading UBIqube's innovation. One particular area of focus for Hervé is around next-generation management software architecture, which is needed for smooth migration to software-defined network, or SDN, and NFV and beyond. So let's look at the biggest trend that the telecom industry has seen in the last few years. There is no telecom conference today which does not discuss software-defined network and NFV. And let's take a quick minute to look at why this is that critical. Telecom operators have long struggled to control operational costs and increase the speed of service delivery. Incremental network technology improvements, cost reductions via managed operations, network sharing, and marginal service delivery improvements have not really led to the dramatic cost savings or improved time to service launch that the operators were hoping for. Service providers now think that more radical approach proposed by network function virtualization, or NFV, and SDN may take them further towards these goals. NFV and SDN are hot buzzwords because they promise new, more flexible business models, higher revenue margins, greater network efficiency and control, and obviously promise a lower CapEx and OpEx. The fundamentals, so this is how it's done, is by decoupling the network functions from the hardware layer and enabling those virtualized network functions to run on commodity hardware that can be managed as a pool of resources. These network functions will then be fully defined by software, which will allow programmability of the network and minimize the dependence on expensive proprietary hardware. Those are promising technologies that could obviously transform the cost profile and flexibility of IP networks. Now, Heavy Reading has conducted major research on both SDN and NFV and have seen how operators are charting their path in these things. This graph on your webinar console it takes a look at what they're planning to do. In this question, we asked about 74 unique global operators, how likely is their company to virtualize each of the following network functions in the next 2 years. As you can see, most of the operators are looking at, starting off with basic network services like DPI, DNS, etc., and going down the layers on policy control, service application layer, OSS, BSS, and analytics, CDN, etc., etc. So it's starting from much more simpler use cases and going into much more complex use cases around IMS, around virtual packet core, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is not a buzzword anymore. This is a reality. Operators have started their journey, and they're looking at how to make the best use of it. Now, when we ask operators about the benefits and ask them to rank the benefits of the NFV implementation, so what are they really looking at? What do they want to get from their NFV deployments? Virtualization obviously promises hardware vendor independence, improved operational efficiency, standardized and open interfaces, and obviously dynamic chaining of network and IT functions to create new integrated services. The current industry attention paid to SDN and network function virtualization kind of obviously trends from some of these things which we are talking about. As you can see from a heavy reading survey, service providers cited reduction in operational cost, new service monetization, and improved resource utilization as a key benefits for NFV implementation to the network. NFV turns network functions into digital services with revenue earning potential. So initially, what started off as a CapEx and OpEx saving reduction process has slowly transformed into a time to market and a service innovation exercise. Now, one of the key fundamental bottlenecks today is around service management. Now, if you look at the market and you look at some of the vendor noise that we hear, there are many announcements around SDN controllers and people talking about how SDN controllers can manage all aspects of these SDN NFV deployments. The fact is, most of the SDN deployments or the SDN controller announcements that we see is very data center centric. It's very constricted to data centers. It needs to be broader. It needs to reflect the telecom service relations. Needs to reflect the service provider ecosystem. It's not just about data center. It's about services. It's about orders. It's about the product catalog. It's about service management, service assurance. So orchestration at the data center level has a role to play, but it's restricted. The story needs to be much broader. So let's look at some of them. And OSS is not a new thing, right? Operators have had OSS for the last 25 years or more. Some homegrown, some with the key OSS vendors in the space, and so on. However, the legacy service fulfillment systems are challenged, and they cannot handle some of the dynamics that's needed in the world of SDN and NFV. So what are the key ones, which are the major challenges? One of the key things which comes up when we talk to operators around their OSS system, the lack of network centricity. OSS data structures, if we follow TM Forum and other standards, are very BSS centric or customer centric, and pretty much lack the end-to-end accurate network and device abstraction kind of a domain. Data structure inconsistency, which kind of inhibits communication to different OSS systems. Now operators don't have one OSS system. That would be great, but normally we have at least tens or hundreds of OSS systems. The common language, the data structure, which are varied between different systems, that causes huge impediment. Lack of automation and consistency. Device configuration rights were implemented by in-house CLI script, EMS systems, etc., which were non-automated, which were prone to error, expensive to maintain. And it was very directly coupled or tightly coupled with the hardware and software systems and were provided by network equipment providers. We are talking about a common layer of abstraction, and that needs to align with the service model of the operators. Without that, all the vision that we are talking about on NFV and SDN will fall short of expectation. Incorrect inventory data information, this is an old problem. It has never been really fixed. Challenges to keep an accurate level of physical and logical network resources, especially when service providers have multiple inventory systems, some of them automated, some of them real-time, some of them legacy, and some of the inventory information still on homegrown databases and Excel spreadsheet. This is a problem which has existed and continues to exist. Lack of service to device mapping, it goes into the device abstraction layer. If you are not going to be able to horizontally abstract devices in a standard way and then be able to map that with services and keep that accurate and in real time and to be honest, manage the services accordingly in a much more granular way, it's going to be a problem. Inaccuracy of device data model kind of aligns with some of the things we have already said. And obviously that goes down to lack of agility, right? So current service fulfillment solutions lack the agility and automation which is required especially around massive service and integration effort, are part of the overall OSS story. Now, when we look at a cloud world and we look at SDN, look at NFV, etc., it needs to be much more dynamic. It needs to be much more automated. And those are things which needs to happen for SDN or NFV initiatives to become very, very successful. So in our view, end-to-end orchestration layer becomes a very critical component of next-gen service management solutions or OSS solution. This needs to manage and orchestrate both virtualized and non-virtualized network functions. If you look at this diagram on the right, the VNF management down is a simplistic version of what ITSI Mano Group has talked about, right? And they're talking about VNF manager, they're talking about NFVO, the NFV orchestrator, and we see many solutions out in the market, very much with a view to the world of virtualization. What happens with legacy? That's on the left-hand side, right? That's where TM Forum and others have played a lot of roles. It's the alignment between the service model, the resource management, the activation platforms, and so on. And how do you bring this together? Is that going to be a centralized catalog which brings this together and also have an end-to-end orchestration to bring this all together? All of these things need to happen to make this thing work efficiently. There will not be a world where everything is going to go in the virtualized resources realm. That would be simple. It would be a world where we have coexistence of legacy infrastructure with that of virtualized infrastructure. Hence, we need to have principles which can manage, or service management platform, orchestration platforms, which can manage this much more efficiently. The other part of it, the dynamism of next-generation hybrid virtual service world demands self-monitoring for anomalous events in the network and the ability to diagnose and fix those issues dynamically. This enables load balancing, optimized network resource management. All of these provides economic benefits to service providers. So next-generation orchestration service management platforms, however we now call it, should be able to arm service providers with the ability to preempt service degradation by constantly monitoring, measuring, and maintaining the service metrics in real time. Hence, in the context of hybrid services, it's not just about service fulfillment or service assurance. It's about end-to-end holistic service management, where service management or service fulfillment and service assurance need to closely align with each other. So in a quick nutshell, these are a few fundamental things which needs to happen, right? We believe end-to-end orchestration layer needs to manage and orchestrate virtual network functions as well as the physical network functions, or as people call it, PNF. End-to-end orchestration layer must work closely with a centralized catalog, which needs to evolve to manage and blend both virtualized and non-virtualized services and resources. Fulfillment and assurance should be policy-enabled and should be able to include reusable policy definition, which is centered on quality of service, security, access, etc. Obviously, open interfaces becomes a must because next-gen OSS, next-gen orchestration, next-gen service management, however we want to coin the term, need to integrate with legacy or existing OSS systems. Integration between service configuration and device configuration is critical. We talked about that. Without that, it's impossible to be able to maintain the sanctity of the overall platform, which will become much more dynamic, much more real-time. Real-time service chaining of virtualized and non-virtualized network function also becomes a critical component of next-gen service management functions. Automated discovery and reconciliation, critical for real-time discovery of network topology, correlation of that with customer, service, physical, and virtual resources. In the end, really, it's also about having an underlying predictive analytics or big data predictive analytics kind of a solution, which can help with the whole service management aspects because it can identify trends, patterns, subscriber behavior, and so on and so forth. So I know that we're going to hear a lot more about these concepts, these topics I talked about, and how we take a fresh look at service management as we go along. Before we get into, I hand it over to Hervé, we have a poll question for the audience. And we have a huge number of audience today, one of the highest audience numbers that we have seen in recent webinars. I would like to encourage you guys to, kind of answer the poll question that shows up on your website. The question is, do you plan to deliver on-demand services? The option is yes, both on the cloud and on the prime. The second choice is cloud-based only, and third option is no, that no intention of providing an on-demand services. So the question is, Do you plan to deliver on-demand services? Option 1 is yes, both on the cloud and on-prem. Second option is cloud-based only. And third is no. Again, really want to encourage you all to please fill up your choice. It helps us to gauge the audience, see how you guys are looking at it, and obviously ties in with what Hervé is going to talk about in the next few slides. So let me see what the responses were. So 65%, yes, both on the cloud and on the prime. And I think that it's a perfect segue where I want to hand it over to Hervé. Hervé, can you take us over? You see what the audience is saying, both on cloud and prime, 65%. We are talking about complex resource management, complex service management. And I know UBIqube has a fantastic story in that. I'd like to hand it over to you and, and to take us to the next part of the webinar. Over to you, Hervé.
Hey, thanks a lot, Harry. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, West Coast. Good afternoon, East Coast and Europe. And yes, good evening, Asia. Thanks you all for joining that webinar. And as you mentioned, Harry, I am really delighted to share a vision about reinventing OSS for NFV SDN era. Today's presentation agenda, it's all about the virtualization storming the telecom service landscape and how it is impacting the back office and the service delivery models. We will illustrate that revolution, should I say, with one of the main typical use cases we are dealing with in early NFV deployment, the on-demand or self-controlled security services. Typically, how can I allow the end user to manage its own firewall and IDS/IPS policies? That can be, of course, delivered on the cloud in an NFV mode, but also on-prem. We will then see the resulting impacts on the telco OSS, and in particular, the need for multi-domain orchestration system. What is a multi-domain orchestration system? They are composed of an hybrid network manager and a modular service orchestration. And I will insist on those two key aspects, hybrid and modular, in order to avoid any vendor lock-in and to ease the adoption of any new technology, reducing the time to market. I will then introduce the UBIqube products, the MS Activator, that modular service orchestration platform, and our OBMF engine. OBMF stands for Object-Based Management Framework, the underlying hybrid network manager. Of course, I will keep some time for a Q&A session. First, let me show you what I see in our industry. We are all aware of the virtual service storm that is hitting the telco OSS world. Massive adoption of network function virtualization, or NFV, is mainly driven by the cloud usages. End users, our end customers, are used now to deploy their application on the cloud. They are used to spin out VMs, install application, use them on demand. They want to keep that same level of dynamicity and self-control also for their network services. Consuming NFV like they are consuming Amazon Cloud Services, for example. This virtual service storm impacts drastically the telco OSS. It's both a natural evolution to address new type of services, but it's also a revolution, because the OSS must now allow the design and the delivery of those new services in a very tight time frame. Instead of spending months, not to say years, designing a service, now it's the question of weeks before the service definition up to the service delivery. Look at the telco industry, for example. Legacy OSS were designed first, and not to say only, to manage core pipe services, like broadband, Metro Ethernet, MPLS VPN, Layer 2 VPN, and so on and so forth. All the effort and the budget were allocated to those core services. Businesses CPE on-prem were not managed or just configured to provide connectivity to the core. Only few services were delivered on those devices, and each time it was by building yet another silo in the back office to host the vendor EMS or NMS. So that at the end of the day, only experts were able to deliver advanced services on prime, like managed security services or managed IPPBX. This silo-based architecture combined with ad hoc config approach are roadblocks for customer self-service delivery and prevent any net programmability. This architecture does not scale, and it's no more in line with what the market and the industry is looking for. For example, if you zoom to the SMB market, even multi-site companies now do not need VPN or MPLS VPN anymore, as most of their applications are consumed on the cloud. It could be a public or hybrid cloud, in some few use cases private cloud, so easy to set up VMs on a cloud provider. So that what we are looking from a telco now, it's more reliable internet accesses than a best-of-breed MPLS VPN. We need then to invent new OSS systems that comply with the self-service customer behavior. We also have to think about delivering services end-to-end, from the business CPE up to the cloud, so that telco can monetize their network and data center in order to anticipate the decline of their MPLS VPN business. This new OSS must also provide a solution to the lack of alignment between service orchestration and device configuration. It must be, of course, multi-vendor by nature in order to avoid the vendor lock-in. Vendor dependency is even more crucial for NFV type of deployment, where all the functions can be split into different VNF, allowing telcos to select different VNF providers or VNF vendors, depending on the type of services that they want to roll out, depending on the features, and of course, depending on the prices. Among the early NFV services we have seen deploying our solution globally, one of the first use cases is delivering on-demand security services. What does that mean? Firewall and IPS are complex services, and some telcos may be reluctant to deliver such kind of services to all the market. Those services are the first one that come in mind when we talk about NFV and cloud-based services. So what we saw, in fact, is that the first adoption of NFV deployment is to run a virtualized firewall on the cloud as a VNF. But doing so, you will then realize that you need also to implement or to complement that cloud-based service by some on-site, on-prime IPS services. As you're aware, around 80% of the threats are coming from inside, like all those infested USB keys that we can share among users. So as a service provider, you want to block those attacks before they are entering your backbone and your data center. So we see a mix of CPE-based and NFV-based services. As a service provider, you also want to reduce your operational cost and answer the need for dynamicity by automating the VNF setup and the service chaining, so that you want to configure automatically the underlying virtual network in your data center infrastructure. But automating the customer onboarding on the cloud is just not enough. You must also reconfigure dynamically your POP devices to collect the traffic from the customer network or customer VPN up to the customer VNF. For that, you need also to implement SDN technologies and concepts. So your OSS should act as a control plane, sending routing information and routing updates to the router on the POP in order to redirect the traffic to the VNF. Finally, by acting as a SDN controller, collecting the traffic, automating the VNF, is really great. But all this automation is useless if you still need experts to implement customer change requests by manually configuring the VNF via different vendor-specific EMS or NMS. Simplifying the management of the applications inside the VNF It's key. For example, we have telco customers that are relying on us to build the interface so that customers can themselves easily modify firewall or URL filtering policies without having the ability to modify the routing, the interface settings, or any other service configured in a VNF. Self-care management is key, and this first manage on-demand security service use case illustrates the need to invent a new multi-domain orchestration approach. What is that multi-domain orchestration approach? The key building blocks are the hybrid network manager southbound and the modular service orchestrator northbound. Let's talk about the hybrid network manager southbound. The hybrid network manager will act as a VNF manager. It must also ease the activation of the services inside the VNF, acting as a multi-vendor domain manager. For example, it should be able, on one end, to spin out a new VM, configure the virtual network, and on the other end, to configure the application inside the VNF. For example, security policies, routing policies, DPI, etc. Any network service that can be virtualized, in fact. Focusing on the data center is key, but this is only one part of that big picture. The hybrid network manager also should take into account legacy devices. As mentioned by Harry, end-to-end service management is really needed to not only to deliver the services, but also to ease the migration to NFV type of deployment. Most of the time, the new standards or blueprint are quite myopic. They consider new architecture and invent new paradigms in a greenfield environment. But as a telco, I have to deal with existing customers and legacy devices. And I do not want to revamp my back office to end up again with a silo-based architecture where I will have a silo to deal with NFV type of deployment and yet another set of tools to deal with my legacy network. So I need my manager network to be hybrid, being able to encompass both NFV and legacy. This hybrid approach must also span across SDN. For real end-to-end service orchestration, I need to inform dynamically my backbone POP devices about new customers and new VNF, so that the traffic can be automatically rerouted to the cloud as needed. This is the role of that hybrid network manager, either directly or by integrating with SDN controller. Finally, the hybrid network manager must expose northbound a unified set of API that can be consumed easily by the service orchestration. Really, abstraction is key in our world today. That service orchestration, unlike classical legacy service catalog, must be modular. What does that mean? It must provide a service mashup interface so that telcos can easily, quickly, and efficiently design any new service as they go, without relying on long and costly vendor professional services. The second main advantage of such approach is to avoid any OSS software upgrade when implementing new services, reducing downtimes and risk. And really, in addition to the abstraction, modularity, and on-the-fly service definition, I would say are the key features that are requested today. Last but not least, as customers need dynamicity up to self-care services, that modular service orchestrator can also be used as the customer-facing interface. It should be able to expose self-care widget, for example, for fulfillment, as well as service assurance dashboard. Like it was mentioned before by Harry, there's really a need to align service fulfillment and service assurance. And of course, because it will be the customer-facing interface, that modular service orchestrator must be multi-tenant and must support role-based access control. But let's deep dive into the hybrid network manager. This engine is the masterpiece of the solution. Its main value is, of course, to provide an abstraction layer so that the modular service orchestrator or any third-party system can easily consume its northbound APIs to deliver the services regardless of the vendor, so multi-vendor, or whatever the domain, multi-domain. We mentioned that, legacy, SDN, NFV. Going back to the managed security example, that modular service orchestrator will simply send order to create, read, update, delete, or import firewall policy or the list of URL categories transparently, whether it is on a prime hardware box from vendor A, or whether it is on a firewall instance from vendor B running on a data center chassis or inside a VM. Expanding the features on the hybrid network manager should be as easy as defining new simple building blocks like the Lego ones, so that those granular building blocks can be simply grouped together to define a service. To provide that level of abstraction, understanding the service data model is key. Yes, we need abstraction, and having a fixed common data model will help. But what is the world today? The world is not just black or white, and not everybody will have the same abstraction logic. So vendors as well as telco wants to differentiate from each other. So you need more than just a fixed data model. What really is needed is adaptability. We as an industry must design an adaptable abstraction framework so that tomorrow I can easily manage new services. For example, I want to manage my virtual home from a manager hosted on the cloud that will control all the IP devices at home, from the lights up to the fridge. And this is not only because I'm French. Easily introducing new services means also openness. The hybrid network manager must expose also open interfaces. Not only a northbound to the service orchestrator, but I will say also east and west to third-party system in order to integrate with some legacy system in the telco back office. First, to ease the migration to the new type of delivery model and to that NFV, hybrid NFV SDN legacy network management solution. But let's focus a little bit on the hybrid network manager in an NFV deployment only, so on that particular domain. As mentioned previously, the hybrid network manager will act as a VNF manager, being able to set up and monitor VMs, to configure the underlying virtual network and the data center infrastructure. It must also ease the activation of the services inside the VNF, acting as a multi-vendor domain manager. For example, by deploying security policies or DPI configuration. Basically, the hybrid network manager should be able to provide service fulfillment and service assurance for any network service that can be virtualized. Wow, that's a lot of functions for the same module. And as a software development company, we rely on agility and modularity. Analyzing the SDN architecture, we at UBIqube think that it should be expanded by splitting the VNF manager into two different sub-entities, the VNF application manager and the VNF container manager. What does that mean? And on that slide, this is what we think the SDN 2.0 diagram should look like. First of all, we must remove the need for vendor-specific EMS. This is really the role of the VNF application manager to handle the device's configuration and to provide an abstraction layer to the modular service orchestrator northbound. This VNF application manager will then integrate southbound not only with the virtual network devices themselves running as a VM, but also with the VNF container manager. That second main building block roles will be dedicated to managing the VM, like spinning out a VM, stop the VM, remove the VM, and also to configure the underlying virtual network to allow the service chaining between the VMs themselves. The role of that VNF container manager can then expand to managing the data center infrastructure by consuming the virtualized infrastructure manager API. At the end of the day, that VNF container manager gets rid of any VNF vendor specificities. And all those specificities will be taken into account by the VNF application manager. So let's now focus on the northbound part of that HCMANO diagram. But remember that what is really also needed is that end-to-end multi-domain service delivery platform. So northbound, there's a modular service orchestrator that will rely on the abstraction layer provided by the hybrid network manager to orchestrate services, yes, end-to-end, regardless of the nature or the type of the managed entities, and regardless of the deployment scenario. For example, going back to our on-demand security services use case, managing firewall policies is just a question of allowing or denying source and destination IP addresses, mask, protocol, and ports applications. The service orchestrator must not have to know the vendor, nor if the firewall is a physical one or a virtual one. By simplifying that delivery of the service, the modular service orchestrator can then provide a unified interface, not only to provision the service, but also to report on the service. Service fulfillment and service assurance should be tightly coupled now to avoid the lack of alignment and the resulting swivel chair issue that we experience in some legacy back office. Unified fulfillment and assurance and simplification of the service delivery are strong requirements to empower on-demand customer self-control services. Our network industry must provide to the end customers the same experience that they are enjoying today, managing their Exchange server or web server directly on the cloud. To achieve such a goal, the modular service orchestrator must be flexible, allowing the modeling of any new service. This is what we call the service mashup notion. It must be easy to use. Finally, the modular service orchestrator will provide service placement capabilities. And this is really key nowadays. What does that mean? Based on assurance and business logic rules, the service orchestrator should define where to activate that service. This is really key, especially for NFV type of deployment, where it's so easy to overconsume physical resources on my hypervisor. And let me now introduce you the OBMF and MS activator that we are developing at UBIqube. We are designing such kind of hybrid network manager and modular service orchestrator. So if we see first southbound, or at the bottom of that slide, our OBMF engine, OBMF stands for Object-Based Management Framework, is the hybrid network manager. It's composed of southbound devices adapters for both physical devices as well as virtualized devices. As we love simplicity, those adapters only handle the communication to the devices. They do also image management and asset management for full lifecycle management. We can not only manage legacy devices or the application inside the VNF, we can also consume SDN controllers as well as cloud controllers. So we can be the orchestrator that will send orders to that SDN controller or cloud controller also to spin in VMs or to mention to the SDN controller that a new VM or a new customer was on board and you need to send a routing update in order to redirect the traffic. Or to configure simply SDN-aware devices using OpenFlow. Then what OBMF permits is the decomposition of any configuration or any data model into configuration objects with granular methods to create, read, update, or delete instances of the configuration objects on the devices. OBMF features also a unique import method so that we can automatically discover all the configuration on a particular devices, and we can do also remediation. This is very useful, and it's a must-have, I would say, if you want to migrate from legacy to NFV or to SDN. It's also very useful if you want to roll back and to do configuration remediation. Are you sure that what you have in your central CMDB, it's really what is on the devices? Last but not least, OBMF exposes a unified abstracted set of APIs to the northbound, and in particular to the MS activator, that is the service orchestrator. What does that mean? Change requests can easily be decomposed into a vendor-agnostic stack of orders. So, for example, create a new VLAN, update a QoS policy, delete a firewall policy, set up a new wireless ID or wireless network. Simply execute the stack, and then OBMF will translate that into vendor-specific configuration. So if I look now on the second main building blocks or main pillar of the UBIqube portfolio, northbound, the UBIqube MS activator. It's a modular service orchestrator that is consuming the OBMF features in order to design services. That modular service orchestrator allows service designer to graphically group configuration objects together to build service. They can also control the graphical rendering up to the customer-facing interface. Building those services by aggregating the objects, this is what we call the service mashup. Northbound, the MS activator, as a modular service orchestrator, allow also to perform service assurance for health and performances monitoring, event and log management, up to analytics and alerting. And if we look, that model or that platform is open. So, network designer can connect southbound directly on the OBMF, can hook into the system in order to develop themselves new devices adapters. It's a very small development, couple of days, especially if we already have a device adapter ready. We have for XML, we have for REST APIs, we have that for CLI also. Anything that can be consumed southbound is already supported. So simply duplicate an existing device adapter, and then you can support easily any new vendor. Off the shelf then, you can design on the fly new configuration objects to implement any new service, anything that can be configured on that new device. Or you can modify the existing service library as you want in order, for example, to simplify the delivery of managed firewall services. Northbound, you can also connect as a service designer directly on the web portal in order to access that service mashup interface and to create yourself what is your new service simply by stacking objects and grouping objects together. Last but not least, in addition to service fulfillment and service assurance, the MS Activator provides a multi-tenant web portal featuring role-based access control, so that on the same platform, service designer can create new services on the fly, network operator can deliver the services, and customers can connect directly to their customized web portal to access, of course, monitoring and reporting dashboards, but also, if they are allowed to perform self-controlled services. Let me give you some background about UBIqube. UBIqube is a European-based company. It's a leading next-generation orchestration software specialist. It's also a company with a real product that is already deployed in Tier 1 service providers' architectures globally. And we do have already references in managing services both in the legacy as well as SDN and NFV context. Expertise in multi-vendor managed services, and of course, hybrid network architecture management. It's all about our OBMF engine. And last but not least, we are leading voice at the ONF in the migration working group. That's the reason why we enforce the need for legacy SDN and NFV multi-domain support. What about the migration? How can I easily move from legacy device management to SDN and NFV? And for those that were in Düsseldorf last week at the SDN and OpenFlow World Summit, I hope they enjoy our unique hybrid SDN and NFV service orchestration demo. Thanks a lot, everybody. I think it's time now for the Q&A session. To you, Harry.
Hey, thanks, Hervé. This was great. Thanks for a really comprehensive presentation of the challenges that you see around NFV SDN as well as UBIqube solution in the market. We do have a whole bunch of questions from the audience, and we're going to get into that. But before we do that, we would like to request the audience to please fill out the feedback form that has opened, that's on the computer right now. To complete the form, please press the Submit Answer button at the bottom of the page. I'd like to thank you all in advance for filling out the feedback form. Your participation obviously helps us to better serve you and improve on the webinar experience. So a lot of questions from the audience, Hervé, and I'm not surprised because of the topic. Let's just start with the one here. The question here is policy part of the orchestrator? And what if I already have a policy infrastructure in some third-party systems? I guess the question is, what if I already have a policy infrastructure in some third-party systems? What do I do here? And is policy part of the overall UBIqube orchestrator story?
Yeah, exactly. So this is a very good question. So yes, policy is part of the orchestrator. You can define what is your policy, and you can design the configuration objects to implement policies. And in particular, this is the aim of those APIs that we have northbound and that can be easily consumed, plus the ability to have that import method. So it's all about migration, and it's all about where the data is. So in particular, we can integrate with third-party systems who do have already a policy infrastructure in place, and we can import that automatically into the system. Then we can transform that in order to orchestrate the policies directly. Of course, you can think about the opposite. We can discover policies, and we can then feed those third-party systems. This is what I mentioned by also East and West interfaces.
Okay. Thanks, Hervé. The second one is pretty interesting. The question is, so are you calling MS Activator and OBMF OSS, or would there be an OSS sitting on top of MS Activator?
Very, very good questions. In fact, we are positioning the MS Activator and OBMF as a new service orchestration platform and hybrid network management system. It's up to you to call that OSS. We need to sometimes to put a sticker on something, and for me OSS is very good. You can consume the solution standalone. We do have, for example, Tier 2 service providers that are doing that. But for example, OBMF can be consumed directly as a domain manager, and there, in that case, there will be an OSS sitting on top of the MS Activator. It's really this is what we are pushing in that transition or that revolution in the service provider back office. Now the system should be flexible enough and open enough in order to ease the delivery of the new services, but also the integration inside the service provider back office. It's all about nimbleness and agility.
Thanks, Hervé. So the other question here is, what is really deployed? Is it NFV or is it SDN?
Very good question. So I was in Düsseldorf last week for that SDN and Open Flow World Summit. And in fact, all the discussion was around NFV. Because the first services that we can monetize and that we can deliver as new services are cloud-based services, of course. So we do have a real deployment of NFV services. In particular, that typical use case on security management, but we are also now considering voice over IP deployment, VCP. But when you enter that domain, this is that's the reason why I mentioned also the need to span multi-domain and to include also SDN. Because when you enter the NFV, it's to provide dynamicity. So you need to deliver the services end-to-end. And then you need to, you realize that you need to interact also on your core network. That's what I mentioned by being able to send a routing update to the POP router in order to collect the traffic, to grab the traffic up to the VM. And what about the that notion of VNF container manager? For me, it's a SDN in the data center, where as a VNF container manager, I am the control plane, and I will act on the local virtual network and the virtualized infrastructure that is in fact my data plane. So for me, it's really the way you pitch that. If you're discussing with IT guys, it's all about NFV, it's cloud-based services. But if you are then discussing with the network guys in charge of that new data center infrastructure, both physical and virtual, it's all about NFV. So I would say that if we look at from the service point of view, it's NFV. If you look the complete picture, it's NFV and SDN.
Yep, no, that makes sense. That's probably what we're seeing from the research side as well. It's NFV-centric first, and then obviously the bigger vision is utilizing NFV or virtualized network functions to achieve the goal of SDN going forward, which will take some time. To that point, the next question is, what is the major hurdle for deploying SDN NFV-centric services?
How? Very good question, and I will not answer there is a need for new tools like the MS Activator and OBMF. We all agree on that. For me, the major hurdle is not on the tools themselves. It's also on people and processes. So, for example, NFV is a very good use case. We are talking about network services. So who are you dealing with? You are dealing with the network guys. But where those services are deployed? On servers. On the data center. So who is managing those servers? It's the IT guys. And still today, we have the network guys on one end and the IT guy on the other end. And they have different skills and different expertise. So really, having those people talking together and working together, I think is the main hurdle. And if you have both the networking skills as well as the IT skills, please send me your resume.
That's good. That's good. So let's go into the next question, and I'm sure you're going to get a lot of resumes, though. To be honest.
Thanks.
The next question is: will element management systems or EMS be a thing of the past in NG-OSS architecture?
I don't think so. So because unless you want to provide services exposing bits and bytes of what a particular device can do, element management system or network management system, especially the vendor-specific one, will lack the ability to reduce the complexity. Of course, by nature, they are designed to support all the features on the devices. But if we are looking now on the way telcos want to deliver those end-to-end services, want to do that dynamically up to self-care management. And really the self-care is, for me, the main revolution. So that you need not only to rely on that particular vendor because it's the best firewall vendor on the market today, but you need also to rely on your OSS platform, on your service orchestrator, in order to reduce the complexity and to expose to the end user a simple interface so that, for example, I can easily add a new firewall policy just looking at source and destination address, but not looking at tons of different interfaces or DMZ. Same for, I would say, URL filtering, QoS policy, and so on and so forth. So, yes, I would mention that in the next generation OSS architecture, there's really less demand for element management system rather than a dynamic, open service orchestration platform.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Hervé. This is an interesting question, though. What about vendor-specific orchestrator? There's a whole bunch of vendor-specific orchestrator that's available in the market. Why is that not enough? And what are the limitations?
Because they are vendor-specific mainly. So, of course, they will first address the delivery of the services on a particular type of device. Could be a physical or virtual. So it's difficult then to have that approach, that independent approach where you want to remove the vendor lock-in. So at the end, even if it's via a vendor SDN controller or vendor service orchestrator, it's vendor specific. So for me, of course, there could be some place for such a solution. In particular, if you are a very small service provider and you say, okay, I will bet on that vendor and everything will be only on that vendor. But frankly speaking, discussing with service providers globally, they already have multiple different providers when it goes to NFV type of deployment. Because I will have, especially for NFV in particular, where I will have multiple different VNF. So I'm migrating from a situation where all my services were delivered from one particular hardware box provided by only one vendor. And now I'm splitting all those network functions into different VNFs. And of course, I would say the beauty of NFV type of deployment is that I can select on a per VNF basis the particular vendor, on a per network function basis, the particular vendor that I need.
Thanks, Hervé. I think this is all we have time today for round Q&A. Thank you very much, Hervé, for going through the slides as well as talking, answering most of the questions that we have from the audience. For more information related to today's webinar, please, you will receive personalized follow-up email with details and link to today's presentation on demand. So we're going to get that in the next 24 to 48 hours. I'd like to thank everybody today for attending today's webinar, Reinventing OSS for an NFV SDN era. The webinar was brought to you by Light Reading and sponsored by UBIqube Solutions. On behalf of our guest, Hervé Guedon, I'm Ari Banerjee. Thank you all for your time and have a great day. Thanks all.